Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Instabug and Cotton Bureau. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Vitici. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing well because you know what? We are on the cusp of WWDC, and while we will not be together in San Jose, which makes me sad.
Very sad.
I know. I am looking forward to getting going and seeing all the new things that hopefully Apple has in store for us because we are less, we're 1 week away now as this is published, and that means we have one more wish list episode to do, and of course, that is iOS.
Mm-hmm. We are 1 week away from, at this point that we're recording this, it's Thursday. So by the time this episode comes out, it's very possible that we will have detailed plans as to what WWDC will actually look like in practice. But as we are recording this, we have no idea. We only know that there's going to be a keynote. We don't know in what form.
But that's about it. So, but I'm looking forward to that. I mean, that's a surprise in itself. It'll be interesting. I think, to my mind, the thing that'll be most different probably is how they, obviously, I guess, how they deal with labs, if at all, because that obviously was very much a hands-on, in-person type of thing. The keynote, State of the Union sessions, who knows if those will change much, but they may just be videos that get posted online. Who knows? Well, maybe. I guess we'll all find out soon.
Yes. So why don't we start by sharing some of our iOS 14 wishes, and some of these I think they would apply to iPadOS as well. Personally, I've been trying to think of when putting together this wish list. I was taking a look at my phone and trying to prioritize apps that I use on my iPhone the most. But these things, they definitely do apply to the iPad versions of those apps as well. And John, I want to start with messages. So
okay.
I use messages on my iPad as well, but I definitely use messages more on my iPhone. And essentially, my wish list for messages in iOS 14 it boils down to I want Apple to copy the good parts of WhatsApp. That's basically my wish list.
I noticed that when I was reading your notes. It's definitely WhatsApp inspired.
Yes. So some of these were rumored before. So I think there's a very good chance that we'll get at least some of these features. The first one is I would love to be able to retract, to delete a previously sent message. This is a feature that is available in WhatsApp. It's been available for quite some time at this point. You can long press a message in WhatsApp and you can delete it, and the person on the other end does not see the message anymore unless they were looking at WhatsApp when the message came in. If they look later, what they will see is this message was deleted by the sender. Mm-hmm. So I also want that feature for iMessage. I don't know if this is technically possible at the moment. Maybe it will require an update to the iMessage service. I have no idea. I just know that I want it to be possible. Because sometimes I send a message and maybe I change my mind, or maybe it's like I paste like the wrong link or the wrong information in the wrong thread. Yep. And I want to be able to retract that, to delete that. So I think that would be really useful. Similar, again, inspired by WhatsApp, the ability to star certain messages and mark them as favorites. I think that's a very useful feature of WhatsApp that I don't use enough, but I think it's very nice that you can mark a message as important, and then later you can go in and there's a specific section in the app that shows you all those important messages. It's a nice way to save information for later, but also to mark messages that you like, and maybe in a couple of years you want to look back and you see that message that you starred a few years before. I think that's a very nice touch. More practically speaking, something that I will use a lot and that I do feel like it's absolutely missing from conversations in iMessage is the ability to reply to a specific message and show that reply in line. In WhatsApp, you can tap and hold on a message, you can say reply. And essentially what it looks like is when you reply to that message, the original message is quoted above your reply. So that in a conversation, especially in group conversations with a lot of people, it's easy to keep track of the conversation, because if multiple people are talking at the same time, I think it's normal to lose track of the flow of like who's replying to whom.
And definitely.
With the ability to reply to a specific message, you can easily see, okay, this person is replying to that question, not to my question. So that's very convenient in WhatsApp, and I think it would be also very useful in iMessage. And lastly, I think this was also rumored at some point for iMessage. I would love to be able to tap on a profile photo of a person in an iMessage conversation and open like a profile page for that person. And a profile page could show me that person's details, but not as it is right now, that you only get like the contact card. In WhatsApp, you see like details like, for example, all the photos that specific person sent you, or the links that person sent you, or what are the groups that you and that person have in common in WhatsApp. And that's a very nice feature. Like, it's not just a contact card, it's a contact card plus additional information about the messages that you've exchanged with each other on WhatsApp. And I think it would fit with the new search features, for example, that Apple launched last year. For example, you can now see in iOS 13, you can see all the photos or all the links that were shared in a conversation, but you cannot filter those based on the sender. And I think the ability to have a profile page for people in iMessage would solve that problem.
Yeah, I think these changes would go an awful long way to making messages more powerful, because retracting messages is something I've wanted for a long time. I've gotten much better at this. I used to do it a lot, but especially when you have groups of people that, so you're seeing
used to do this. You used to do this a lot more before.
Yes, I did. And I think part of it is working on multiple devices, that you kind of get lost at which conversation is the one that's open on which device. And the fact that with group messages, sometimes you have, I might have just a thread going with you, but also you in a group with other people, and I see your profile picture in both, and I mistake one for the other. It's really easy to do. So retracting messages would be nice. I try to be more careful about that these days. And starring, I know just from, our back and forth all day long dealing with Mac Story stuff, it'd be nice to star things so I could easily say, what was it Federico told me that we needed to work on, 2 days ago, without having to scroll back 2 days through a bunch of messages. So that would be really terrific. Let me start, I guess, with something that's it's a little thing, but it's one that bothers me a little bit, because it's available on the Mac, but it's not on iOS, and that's in Apple News. And I use Apple News a fair amount on my phone, like just kind of in downtime, I'll take a quick look at the headlines, and every now and then I'll find a story that I want to link in the newsletter or something, and I forget that I'm not on my Mac, and I go to the share sheet, and there's no Open in Safari button. That exists on the Mac. It doesn't exist on iOS. And instead, what I end up having to do is select the text of the headline, go on over to Google, do a search, find the web page, and then save it. And it's just one of those little irritants that bothers me week in and week out. And I'd love to see it come to the iOS version as well.
Yeah, that's a good pick. Next up for me would be music.
Yes.
We mentioned this before. Just 3 things I want to share about music. Smart playlists. I've always been a fan of the idea of creating playlists or searches or lists, call them however you want to call them, but basically custom views that filter data based on specific criteria. This feature is available in music for the Mac. It used to be an iTunes feature. Now it's a music feature on macOS Catalina. I would love to create smart playlists on my iPhone and the iPad, of course. I think it's one of those more advanced features that, if explained well, I think even regular people, for the lack of a better word, would also use. If explained well, and maybe if redesigned to be more intuitive to put together and to be optimized for the iPhone and iPad, I think it would be really useful to create your own custom playlist that gives you a dynamic collection of songs based on filters that you put together yourself. The second one is a long-standing limitation of iOS that I've never fully understood why it hasn't been fixed yet. I want to be able to upload my own music to iCloud Music Library without having to use a Mac. We now have a Files app on iOS and iPadOS. We have a file manager. Why am I forced to use a Mac to upload my MP3s or my, any other song format that I may have to my iCloud Music Library that I'm paying for? So I think this is a relatively simple feature. Just open a file speaker and let me upload songs from iOS as well.
Yeah, this is really just an extension, right? This is just an action extension but related to music.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It could be an extension, or it could be like literally like in the library view, could be like a plus button that says add
Right.
files. Like it could be just that. And lastly, this is a feature that has long been available for Spotify users, playlist collaboration. I would love to create collaborative playlists in Apple Music and share those with my friends or with other people and collaborate on the same playlist. And it's very surprising that it's still not available for Apple Music subscribers.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that was a feature of Spotify, and now that you mention it, I really want that. I mean,
Yeah.
it feels like a natural extension of the very low-key social network that's built into music. I mean, what's there, you can friend people and you can kind of follow their music in a very kind of indirect way. But I feel like that's worked pretty well, and it's nice and low key. It's not got some of the overhang of a lot of other social network services,
Yeah.
but it feels like it's also time to start expanding it slowly and carefully into other things. I mean, we don't need another ping, but we
No.
do, or iTunes Connect for that matter, but something like this would be terrific. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Instabug. Instabug is an SDK for developers that takes care of your entire app lifecycle and user feedback process so you can debug, fix, and improve your app's quality faster and release updates with confidence. With Instabug, you can continuously monitor and measure your app's performance. You can engage with users too by letting them report issues and ask questions from right inside your own app. Instabug lets you collect all of the information about bugs, crashes, and other issues with a focus on privacy and security. Instabug makes it easier for testers and users to report bugs too, which means that you're more likely to do it. A user can just shake their phone and report an error, and you'll automatically get all the details you need to investigate and understand what happened. You'll get reproduction details, network logs, and environmental details that will help you focus on fixing the problem instead of trying to reproduce it yourself. The same is true of its lightweight crash reporter that lets you know exactly which line of code caused the crash. Instabug will help you significantly decrease the time you spend finding issues so you can focus on what matters, fixing them. Many teams are working remotely now for the first time, and having a tool like Instabug that helps gather app and quality metrics, it can be a huge time saver. Imagine getting detailed stack traces and reproduction steps for every bug report with user feedback and continuous app performance monitoring. It could save you and your team a ton of time. It takes just a minute to integrate Instabug into your app, and you can seamlessly forward your reports to your favorite tools like Jira, Slack, Trello, and more. The top mobile companies like Verizon, Lyft, and Ngag all rely on Instabug to iterate faster and enhance their app quality. To learn more, go to try.instabug.com/appstories and get an exclusive 2-month off discount using the promo code AppStories2020. I'll put that link in the show notes too. Again, that's try.instabug.com/appstories and the code AppStories2020 to get a 2-month off discount. Our thanks to Instabug for their support of the show. All right, Federico, I want to cheat just a little bit and mention a Mac feature that I want. And it was something that came to me the other day when I was working on an article, because as a lot of listeners probably know, we use GitHub to collaborate on articles that we're working on for the site. And I tend to work on both my iPad and my Mac during the course of the day. And GitHub, when you're using something like either the GitHub desktop client on the Mac or something like Working Copy on iOS, you have to actually sync it manually. That's just how GitHub works. You push everything to the GitHub repository and you pull it back down with any changes that someone else might have made. And so what I invariably do is I'll be working on my Mac and I'll be working on a story and I'll forget what I've done. And I forget to actually sync it up to the server before I leave my desk. And then I'll be somewhere else in my house and I want to work on my iPad and I don't have the latest version and it's not in GitHub either because I didn't sync. So what I do is I open up screens on my iPad or on my iPhone and I just connect to my Mac Mini and sync it that way, so I don't have to just go down and sit in front of my computer. I'd like it to work the other way too. I'd like to be able on my Mac to access my iPad Pro.
Wait, what?
I would like to be able, yeah, I think I would like to be able to do that. I mean, to be able to, if my iPad, I worked on a story on my iPad and it's sitting upstairs and I'm sitting down here in front of my computer, I'd like to be able to remotely connect to it, do a quick sync, and have everything pulled back down to the Mac. It's the opposite end of the equation.
Interesting. I could see remote, sort of like remote desktop
Yes.
for iPadOS and iOS, maybe perhaps working as a way to do like tech support for your family. Like that's because I don't think if they're gonna do this, like I don't think they're gonna push it as people like John Voorhees, they want to be able to access their working copy stuff. But as a remote support thing, maybe. That's an interesting one.
I think it's unlikely, but it's one of those things that it was came to me as I was frustrated by not being able to access my iPad remotely. Now, there's a lot of issues there. Would it be only available on the same network? What do you do with the fact that it's asleep? How does it wake up? There's a lot of technical issues behind that, but it's something I'd use.
You did kind of cheat though. This is a Mac feature.
I know, and it's maybe a little more iPad than it is iPhone.
Because I am not a cheater, John, I will quickly go over some of the features that I want to see in reminders and notes. I've mentioned this before. I covered this. So I'm consistent also. In addition to not being a cheater, I'm also a consistent person. I mentioned this last year in my iOS 13 review. Reminders, sorting options, especially in individual lists. I think it's kind of wild that we still don't have any sorting options on iOS. More icon options, I wouldn't mind that. You can choose from, I believe, 60 SF symbols for enlisting reminders. But I mean, how many SF symbols there are? Like thousands of them, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, why only 60? Just give me, I don't know, 100 or 500 or something. Obviously, Apple promoted last year's redesigned reminders app as a complete makeover based on smart lists, which would be those like all and scheduled today, those custom buttons at the top of the sidebar in reminders. The problem there is that those smart lists, you cannot actually create your own. And I think, again, just like with smart playlists, I'm a big believer in the idea of creating custom views. We have mentioned this feature over and over on App Stories before. Let me create my own smart lists in reminders and let me pin them to the top of the sidebar. And also, one odd limitation of reminders in iOS 13 is you can have attachments for tasks, which is beautiful. Thumbs up. Thank you. However, those attachments can only be images for some reason. You cannot actually attach a document with a file speaker. And I think that needs to change because why would I want to attach a PDF as a JPEG instead of an actual PDF? I don't get it. Notes. Honestly, I would be perfectly fine if Apple said the only changes in Notes this year are changes to the formatting options, like the things that you can actually enter inside of a note. And I think I mentioned also this before. I would love if Apple was inspired by Noto, which is a third-party note-taking app we've covered on Mac Stories, and allowed you to do more things in terms of formatting your notes. So, for example, things like different types of headings, code blocks, math equations, or maybe tables that contain images and links and videos like in Noto. And also, I would love it if I could just paste a link with Command V or just the copy and paste menu on my iPhone. And if that link, instead of being a raw HTTP URL, if it became a rich link. Right now, you can only get rich links in Notes if you use the Notes extension. And I just want to be able to paste a link and have it become a rich link, because rich links are so much nicer and informative than URLs. URLs, they tell you nothing except the raw path of a link. And the rich link, it gives you a preview with a thumbnail and so forth. Those are so much nicer. So I don't have any particular wishes for Notes. I don't foresee Notes becoming like something as advanced as Devonthink, for example. And that's fine. But more formatting options inside of the Notes editor, those will be very much welcome.
Yeah, I'd like to see that as well. I want to move to the App Store because I feel like family sharing is falling behind. Family sharing got a lot of great updates. I don't know, it's been several years ago now, but the App Store has changed over the last few years. We have more subscriptions, and family sharing never handled in-app purchases to begin with. And so I find myself more and more often with an app or a subscription that I'm using that the rest of my family can't. Now, I understand with subscriptions that maybe that's something that would require a more expensive subscription, but let me subscribe at a higher price. Let me subscribe to something like Fantastical and have my whole family have all the features that come with it. I'd really love to see that, and I do feel like in-app purchases are something that there really ought to be a way to make that happen as well, because that's especially when it comes to things like games. It's not a lot of fun to be, have two people using the same game and they each have to buy the same in-app purchase twice. Again, maybe that you have to buy it at like a family pack, which is a little more expensive, but at least have an option to let people decide whether that's worth it to them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely agree. I ran into this problem all the time because I do have a family sharing set up with my girlfriend and our respective moms. And we all
Mm-hmm.
have access to my App Store account, and I can never share in-app purchases. So that's too bad. What should I mention here? Do you prefer if I mention files or shortcuts first, John? Because I have wishes for both.
Well, let's start with files. We'll close out with shortcuts.
All right, that's well. No, so before I do files, let me just quickly run through the other section because then I want to close with shortcuts also. So in my other section, I'm just gonna collect a bunch of random things. Picture in picture on the iPhone. Why can I not watch picture in picture videos on my iPhone? I have a huge iPhone. It's a big iPhone, right? It's a Pro Max, and it's
Right.
possibly gonna get even bigger this year. And I mean, again, WhatsApp as picture in picture for videos. If you want to watch a YouTube video inside WhatsApp, you can, and it's
Yep.
perfectly fine. So let me put a video and picture in picture on the iPhone as well. Widgets anywhere. We mentioned this in the iPadOS Wishes episode, but for me at least, it applies to the iPhone home screen as well. Allow me to place widgets anywhere and rethink the entire widget system to allow for more dynamic, powerful widgets. And also, I don't know if this is ever going to happen, but complications on the lock screen is something that we've seen concepts for this feature before, made on Reddit and Dribble and those places. But basically, the idea would be, how on the lock screen you have the clock and the calendar, and if you
Right.
think about it, those are they could be considered like default complications. But what if I could put my own complications on the lock screen? Maybe a summary of the tasks that I'm supposed to work on today, or maybe like a mini calendar, maybe something else. The idea of having these custom complications on the iPhone lock screen, I think it would be really interesting to see. And lastly, I would mention for Safari, I have just two features. One has been rumored recently in 9to5 Mac, a native translation feature for web pages powered by the Neural Engine. This sounds terrific to me. And
Yes.
it's on, Google Chrome has this feature, and I think Apple could do it without relying on Google. They could use the Neural Engine and the text APIs that they have to do some really, really well done offline, private by default translation. That would be amazing to have in Safari. And also, again, probably never going to happen, but I would love it if Apple allowed developers to make real extensions for Safari, like on the Mac, extensions that don't have to live in the share sheet, but extensions that you can put in the toolbar and do more, just like on the Mac. That would be really nice to have.
Yeah, I really like that last one because you're right. I mean, there are too many apps that are really not apps at all. They're almost empty apps. They're just there to create an extension for Safari, and so that makes a lot of sense. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Cotton Bureau. Cotton Bureau are the folks who make awesome graphic tees, hoodies, and a whole lot more. You know what? I've kind of been on both sides of this equation. I've both been a customer buying t-shirts from Cotton Bureau and selling them myself because we here at Mac Stories we sold our first ever t-shirt and some enamel pins through Cotton Bureau last year, and it was a fantastic experience as a seller, but it's just as great if you're a buyer too. I've been buying t-shirts and other items from Cotton Bureau for years now. All of my favorite tech tees and hoodies and things like that have come from there. The quality of the shirts is fantastic. They offer a wide range of colors. They're comfortable. They fit well. And the folks that work through them, it's not just t-shirts. They're selling things like mugs and enamel pins and hoodies and a whole lot more. All kinds of companies have worked with them over the years. Jason Snell over at Six Colors and the Incomparable. The ATP gang, we, of course, at Mac Stories have worked with Cotton Bureau. Stratechery, MKBHD, and of course, many of the shows on Relay FM have worked directly with Cotton Bureau. And that's where a lot of my t-shirts have come from. I've got the MKBHD one and the 512 Pixels one, but I've also got shirts from Connected, a hoodie from Upgrade, and a whole bunch more over the years. Cotton Bureau is a great place to buy and to sell t-shirts of all kinds, themed around sports, movies, gaming, food, and a whole lot more. Their sweatshirts and tees are high quality and comfortable, and they have great customer service. So go on over to cottonbureau.com right now and check them out, and use the code AppStories10 to get 10% off. Go there now. That code is only valid until July 3rd. That's cottonbureau.com and the code AppStories10 to get 10% off. Our thanks to Cotton Bureau for their support of the show.
Okay, so John, as we were recording, we had to take a brief pause because just a few minutes ago I said at the moment of recording this, we don't know what WWDC is going to look like in terms of schedule. And as we were recording, I have my fancy notification system for Apple, for the Apple newsroom, and we just got an official schedule. So we know that there's going to be a keynote address from Apple Park, June 22nd, 10 a.m. Pacific time, followed by a State of the Union on the same day, 2 p.m. Pacific time. Sessions will happen from Tuesday to Friday of that week, June 23rd to 26th. Sessions will be posted as videos starting at 10 a.m. Pacific also. And there's going to be new developer forums where members of the developer program will be able to participate and ask questions to Apple engineers. And Apple is also doing one-on-one labs where you will be able to schedule an appointment with an Apple engineer and have one-on-one time to ask questions and very likely submit your code and get feedback on the app that you're working on. So we now have a schedule. We know we're going to follow along, and it's going to be fun, I think.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Boy, I bet those one-on-one sessions will be snapped up really quickly. They're going to have an enormous amount of demand for that, but I'm glad they're doing it. I mean, I think that is the right thing to do, even if it is hard to get one of those slots. And, I guess as a morning person who gets most of my work done in the morning, I'm going to have to turn into an afternoon and evening person because it looks like this schedule is going to keep us very busy, particularly in the afternoon and evenings, but it should be a lot of fun.
And all my good intentions of going to sleep earlier are just out of the window. So
at least for a week. But so we have a week yet to kind of rest up and get ready. So I think we'll be good, and I'm looking forward to it. It should be lots of fun. All right, Federico, let's get back to our wishes because I have a few more, and one of the ones I want to share with you is, in fact, the share sheet itself. The share sheet has seen a redesign recently, but I think there's more work to be done. Those contact circles at the very top just don't work on my phone. They haven't worked forever on my phone. They do work on my iPad, and it's just frustrating that it's been broken. But what I really want is, I still feel like the action extensions need a lot of work because by combining, there's a combination of built-in app-specific actions, third-party apps, and shortcuts all in here. Now, it definitely got better during the iOS 13 beta, and I don't have too many complaints other than the list is just too long, and I feel like I have to manage it too much. And I don't like that I have to scroll all the way to the bottom to get to the edit button, because what I'll find is okay, I'll do that, and then I'll maybe move something up to a favorite, get it near the top because it's something I use frequently. But because I've scrolled all the way down to the bottom to do the editing after I back out, I'm still at the bottom of the list, and now I got to scroll back up and find what I wanted. It's just a little bit clunky. Plus, with the icons being monochrome and being on the right, it's a little hard still to figure out what you're looking at. And I'll tell you, there are some apps that use a custom icon and that's not, related to their app icon, and maybe don't mention the name of the app in the name of the action, and it can be really hard to find which one is the one that applies to a particular app. So I feel like that's got to change. I also have never liked the distinction between share and action extensions because I feel like they're not used consistently by anyone. And I have a pretty good feel in my mind for what an action extension is and what a share extension is, but it's just not used consistently, which makes it even harder to find things. And I came across this again recently. I love the new Good Links app, but its extension is a share extension. And to me, that ought to be an action extension because I'm not sharing these links with anybody. I'm sending links into Good Links. And to me, that's an action because I'm, saving it and I'm maybe adding some tags and that sort of thing. But that's, not to pick on Good Links in particular. That's a problem that a lot of apps have. But I'd love to see the share sheet refined a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a very good point. More flexibility there would definitely be welcome. I want to go over files. Again, I mentioned some of these in the iPadOS episode, but for context, I have a bunch more things to share here. So I would love to have more view and sorting options. I think files could borrow a lot of things from the Finder in terms of like more sorting options for files and more presentation options for just how you want to browse your documents. I mentioned this before. Again, this is just a collection of things you probably heard or read from me in the past. I want to have quick actions for files on iOS in the file inspector. Again, this is a macOS feature that is also sort of kind of available on iPadOS and iOS as well right now. But those quick actions that you get in the file inspector, those are made by Apple. They cannot be made by third-party developers, whereas on the Mac, they can make those quick actions. So I would love to get a new quick action extension type in iOS 14 so developers can make their own files extension to be embedded in the inspector, in the Files app. Built-in versioning. So this is a feature, the ability to save multiple versions of a file, for example, in iCloud Drive. That's been available for a long time, but Files does not have a native feature to browse those versions. It's up to each individual developer to build their own view for browsing versions, for example, in MindNode. And if you take a look at the Finder instead, the Finder and any document on the Mac as a native way to let you browse versions. And I think Apple should offer this feature. It shouldn't say to developers, we have an API, but then you got to build your own view controller for it. I think it should be offered by Apple by default on iOS and iPadOS. In like the general idea for files, like the things that I want to see this year, broadly speaking, is a lot of, this is actually kind of in common with shortcuts. I want to see a lot of bug fixes and performance improvements and a lot more stability, especially when it comes to files. Basic operations like extracting a zip archive should not fail, and it shouldn't take 5 minutes to extract a 60 megabyte zip archive on my iPad. It just shouldn't happen. Something that takes 20 seconds on the Mac, I don't understand why it requires several minutes in files for iPhone and iPad. Or even things like moving a file from one location to another. Every so often, I get an error message and I need to restart my device because those file operations are failing in the Files app. And that's just not acceptable. It shouldn't be the case. So a lot more stability, a lot of bug fixes. And then there's just a bunch of, smaller, just random things I want to see. Like when I save a file using the Save to Files action extension, Apple added the option to rename a file upon saving it, which is nice. But I also would like to tag a file while I'm saving it. And so a tagging feature in that extension would be handy. Again, saved searches in files as well, in addition to music and reminders. I want to have saved searches in here as well. This feature was supposed to come out with iOS 13. It was in the beta, and then it was pulled, and it never came back again. Let me keep a file offline forever. So this used to be called the pinned files feature. Right. It was pulled from iOS 13 and it never appeared again. I hope that Apple was able to figure this one out, and maybe they're bringing it back in iOS 14. That would be nice, because certain files and certain folders I always want to keep offline. Even though I'm storing them in iCloud Drive, I want to always keep them offline for offline usage. And lastly, I know that our own Ryan really wishes this feature was possible. Let me save specific files and folders as quick launchers on the home screen. So I don't have to use a custom shortcut to make it happen. Just let me save a file that I use all the time, or a folder that I open all the time. Let me save it as a quick shortcut. Not a shortcut in the sense of like a shortcut for the Shortcuts app, but like a quick launcher on the desktop, on the home screen. I'm sorry. Mac users would call them aliases on the desktop.
Right.
That's basically the same idea.
Yeah, no, those are all good suggestions. I feel like files is, it's come such a long way over a relatively short amount of time, but it's just not quite there yet. And there are times where I feel that tug back to my Mac, because I've realized something that I'm trying to do would be just so much easier in the Finder. I just want to mention a couple of more small things before we get into shortcuts, because I want to give you some time to really dig into that. But Mail, we've talked about this a lot before, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but please, some more modern features in Mail, like snoozing and that sort of thing. And I'd really like a true share sheet. I mean, there's more of that in there now. I mean, you can, there are things you can do with attachments and links and that sort of thing. But I feel like getting the actual message out of Mail is still too hard. And even if it's not the message itself, the content of the message, a link to the message itself, just using the share sheet as opposed to doing like a drag and drop action would be fantastic to have. Beyond that, I feel like I do get serious suggestions now for shortcuts to run on my lock screen, but they're almost never ones that I can run from the lock screen. And that just feels like a bug. I mean, if I have a shortcut that can only be run from inside Safari, why would I want that on my lock screen? It's a feature that I think has a lot of potential that's never been realized, and I'd like to see Apple take another run at it, or else I guess just kill it, because they show up and most of the time they're not very useful.
Yeah, so shortcuts, there's a lot of it's a very long conversation here. I'll try my best to keep it short for the podcast. And once again, you can go back and read the section from my iOS and iPadOS 13 review called "What's Shortcuts Missing," and I also had another section in my 2019 story called "Beyond the Tablet" about things that I would like to see in shortcuts. Most of those wishes they do still apply to shortcuts in iOS 13. Bug fixes and performance improvements for sure. Especially over the past few months, I've run into so many different bugs in shortcuts. And I have so many shortcuts that I've created and that I cannot share, on that I needed to wait before sharing them because of an issue that Apple needed to resolve in shortcuts. I would really like to see the app get faster and just more stable and more that inspires more confidence. So many times, like, I ran into this odd visual glitch. It's small things and bigger things, like sometimes the app just crashes, or sometimes like the text and the font glitches out and it gets all weird on screen. So just more stability and like cleanup of the whole thing. You can still see some of the workflow features that were never really touched in the transition to shortcuts. So ideally I would like to see like a major cleanup of the entire experience with with a focus on stability and performance, and getting rid of those crashes, getting rid of those glitches. Then when it comes to new features, I guess the first one on my list would be, as a power user of shortcuts, my big hope in iOS 14 is that we are going to see some power user enhancements. So features designed for people who really rely on shortcuts, who really spend a lot of time building and using shortcuts. I've mentioned some of this before. The idea of, for example, debugging tools. So in short, when I'm working on a long shortcut like MusicBot, for example, it gets very difficult to browse the long structure of this shortcut. And especially if you want to make sure that an action, for example, is receiving the output that you expect or is outputting the data that you expect to the following action. That gets real tricky to do in shortcuts once you have a shortcut that spans like 1,200 actions. So breakpoints could be an idea of like, let me pause this action, let me see what the action is dealing with, what's the data flow happening in this action, and then continue. That's a pretty standard feature in code editors and IDEs that developers use to program their apps, and I think it would make a lot of sense in shortcuts as well. Or maybe let me fold entire blocks of actions so that scrolling along shortcut becomes easier. Or maybe let me add little visual indicators or labels at the side of the screen. Or maybe let me save some actions or some groups of actions that I use all the time. Let me save them as presets so that it becomes easier for me to insert them in a new shortcut. So all these little sort of quality of life enhancements for power users, I think they will go a long way toward making it easier for people who rely on shortcuts to use it even more. And
yeah, you're absolutely right. I think things like multi-windowing too, and drag and drop,
oh yeah,
drag and drop actions or blocks of actions from one shortcut to another would be fantastic. And one thing that I'd like to see, Federico, is I'd like to kind of, now that I've been using more home screen shortcuts with custom icons, I'd like to be able to move those from one device to another and have that stuff sync around.
and in terms of features for everybody, not just for power users, files integration, better integration with the Files app is something that I really would like to see.
Yeah.
So the ability to go outside the iCloud Drive sandbox and to programmatically pick any file or any folder outside of the shortcuts subfolder in iCloud Drive. I would really like to see this. Perhaps it could be based on the bookmarks technology that we talked about here on App Stories previously, or perhaps it could be based on something else. But I just think it's time for shortcuts to allow you to go beyond the sandbox. I would love to see more options for putting together custom interfaces in shortcuts. And by this, I mean, when you use shortcuts, maybe you create a shortcut that has a list that allows you to choose from a list. And so you have a list and you can actually pick stuff from a list. Or maybe you have a notification that you can display. Maybe you have an alert that comes up in the middle of the screen and you can tap OK on the alert. I would love to see more such elements, more choice in terms of like the interface elements that I can bring up in a shortcut. So maybe, I don't know, crazy ideas, John. 3 buttons in an alert instead of 2 buttons.
Oh,
or maybe
don't be too crazy.
Let me have, I don't know, a text and an image in a list without having to use Toolbox Pro or without having to use crazy workarounds like turning lists into contacts, which is something that people do now. Just more freedom in terms of the native UIKit elements. And you don't have to be a developer because right now in shortcuts, it's not like you go in and you search for UIKit and then you put together code. No, it's just visual actions that are prepackaged for you. And I would love to see more of those prepackaged UI elements, but with just more options and more fields for parameters and stuff that you could put in there. This is an obvious one. Automations. It's a feature that Apple launched last year, the ability to run certain shortcuts on a schedule or based on other triggers. Most of them, however, require a manual confirmation for you to say, yes, run this automation, like if it's a specific time of day or if you connect to a Wi-Fi network. And I would like to see an option, again, for power users to say, I don't need the confirmation. I trust what I'm doing here. I trust what I built. I trust this automation. Execute it automatically without having to ask me for confirmation every time. And there's a bunch of ways that Apple could go about this. I shared some ideas in last year's iOS review. I think it would be interesting to see full support for automations in the background for users who really want that functionality. And lastly, I would mention maybe revamp the system that allows you to add shortcuts to your home screen. I love the fact that I can add a shortcut to my home screen with a custom icon, which obviously we've done the Mac Stories shortcuts icons, which expand the set of glyphs that you can use in shortcuts. However, I would also like to see adding a shortcut, an individual shortcut, as a sort of a dynamic widget to the home screen. So if Apple is doing these new widgets for the home screen in iOS 14, I would love to have a single shortcut as its own widget on the home screen, and maybe that widget could support a custom UI or interactivity, so I could like choose from lists and do something else. I don't know, or maybe live icons could be another option for shortcuts on the home screen. And I mean, I would love to see more again niche features like global keyboard shortcuts. So let me run a shortcut by just pressing a hotkey anywhere on the system, or give me global variables so that I don't have to store data in utilities like data jar or perhaps in text files in iCloud Drive. But that's more like the more esoteric stuff. Really, right. I just thought, I can't believe I'm forgetting these folders. Let me organize my shortcuts with folders. Of course. Oh, I was almost forgetting. So that's about. There's a lot that I would like to see in shortcuts. Honestly, I will be fine with multi-window, as you mentioned, folders, bug fixes,
files.
Files.
You think that's too much? Is that asking too much?
Actually, I want it all, so I can't help it. I'm sorry, I want it all. So. All
right, yeah, I kind of feel the same way, but I mean, there is a hierarchy of priorities, and things like bug fixes, is sorely needed at this point. So I hope we get a lot of those as well. All right, Federico, that's a great place to stop. I am very excited. 1 week from today, we will be starting our coverage at Mac Stories, so everybody check it out. We are also going to have a special series of App Stories episodes. We're going to be doing extra episodes, so stay tuned for that. We'll be back, I guess, on Tuesday instead of Monday next week, because we're going to be covering the keynote, and then you'll also hear from us the next couple of days after that as well. So stay tuned and keep an eye on Mac Stories for the coverage there and more announcements about App Stories. I want to thank our two sponsors again. That's Instabug and Cotton Bureau. You can find me and Federico over at macstories.net. And Federico, he's over on Twitter and Instagram as @Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.